Good evening, everyone. This is the final lecture in the series on information technology in the global society. And we're really privileged here to have Brian Ennis to deliver this lecture on telehealth. Brian comes with a very diverse background. He has worked in the area of medical imaging. He is one of the founders of a company on managed services. He has worked for Genzyme. He has worked for Santa Fe. He is currently holding for the next few days a senior position with the company that appears here. And he's changing jobs very soon and has accepted another and becoming the Chief Technology Officer of a leading company in the area of telehealth. So he's going to talk about his experiences in telehealth, what the opportunities are, what the challenges are. And again, we welcome your questions at any point, and that would make the discussion more interactive. I just have a quick suggestion to people who have taken this course of Reddit. If you have not met with me recently, you need to meet with me in person, and you can either do it at the end of this lecture or you can do it through Rennie Francisco, who is my associate who coordinates my calendar. I just want to go over what else you need to do in order to get ready for this course. Thank you and welcome.
Thanks very much. I appreciate it. So the new company I'm headed to is actually in California. They're kind of a hippie company, so my title will be Director of Customer Success, but the responsibilities are still the same. Thanks for having me here. I'm actually really excited to talk about telehealth and just to level set with you guys. So back earlier in my days, in the beginning of my career, I happened upon an opportunity to do the first electronic submission to the FDA for Genzyme, which is a big biotechnology company. And this is something that was brand new. And that moment really redefined my career because I started doing something which was brand new to the industry. It doesn't matter if you've worked there for 25 years. It doesn't matter, where you came from. It's something that the industry was adopting as its future. And to be there at the inception of something is really important because that gives you so much more opportunity to innovate, so many more opportunities to do different things. And telehealth really is that. I mean, telehealth is a new market that's going to explode. And for those of you in this position, you are prime position to take a chance and to go forward into telehealth and have some new opportunities for your career. So I have this awesome quote, actually, which is one of the things that I wanted to use to kind of stick into your minds. There's a bigger initiative that's happening in the world right now. There's a bigger revolution. And this is a lot more about the transfer of medicine from being something that's about drugs and about therapies and into medicine that's more patient-centric, right? So even the larger drug companies in the world, and I spent a lot of time talking to them and a lot of time meeting with them, they're all acknowledging that there's this emerging precedent where consumers are becoming smarter, they're becoming more educated, they're becoming more informed about the decisions that they need to make in regards to their health, and they want more for their health providers. And this thing is really what's changing everything. So we'll talk about concepts such as medical tourism, when you can look and find just the right doctor that you need and go to the hospital and find that. That's something you weren't previously able to do. Or the issue around what they call hospital transfers, where I live in Boston, right? I can go from one hospital over here. I could go across the street and go into that hospital and have a different healthcare provider that I've chosen for myself, and there's no information exchange. So there's a lot of things that need to be solved by the industry. So this is causing problems and also for the consumer causing a lot of benefits. So, a great quote from Miguel Barbarossa from Janssen Research and Development is the R&D arm of Johnson & Johnson. And I'll read it in case it's a little fuzzy. But so an exciting new area for disruptive innovation is likely to come from a focus on holistic patient care with an emphasis on lifelong well-being. The convergence of medical and information technologies will be facilitated by a much more informed patient population that will expect more than a pill. They'll expect an integrated patient solution that will address the underlying disease and improve their life. Part of this comes from the frustration that, we have a lot of treatments in the market, but not a lot of cures. And so for those of us as patients or people with chronic health conditions, how can we use technology to make them smarter, to make their lives better, and to make their lives longer? And as technology is kind of really pushing into this market, it's raising the expectations for those patients. So let's bring things back and talk about what's telehealth. There's a lot of terms out there The industry is still kind of circling around standardizing them. And there's telemedicine, telehealth, health information technology. Telehealth specifically is the use of information technologies such as applications or solutions that leverage communication technologies. So this is like your smartphone, right? So I have a mobile app on my smartphone that takes data and transfers it to a healthcare provider. Telemedicine, on the other hand, is the actual services that are provided by a medical institution through telehealth technology. So this is a doctor giving you a diagnosis, this is someone taking a look at a diagnostic image, this is preventative care, all of that human interaction. We're more focused on the technology piece because there's a lot of medicinal therapies out there, there's a lot of health services, but there's not a lot of technologies that are really present to really innovate in the industry. There are some limitations, but within telehealth we have a couple different categories that we can kind of divide things into, and this is where the industry is right now, and I encourage you to dream a little bit bigger and try to think a little bit beyond this, especially with your questions. So there's patient monitoring. This is the ability to monitor a patient at home like they would be in the hospital. So there's a lot of evidence that suggests or even proves that recovery at home is better for you than recovery in a hospital. Hospital is a scary place, it's not always the cleanest place. But if you're going to discharge a patient and send them home, to be able to monitor their blood pressure, monitor their heart rate, monitor their vitals to make sure that they're okay, patient monitoring solutions can deliver that. It's also great for the elderly or people with lifelong chronic conditions. Another category is, of course, real-time interactive applications. This could be something as if a doctor in California is consulting with a doctor in New York on a patient over Skype, right? That could be an example of it. Or even as advanced as manipulating a robotic arm from halfway across the world in the middle of a surgery. That's something that telehealth can deliver. And the last category here, which is the non-interactive or informational applications. So there's no direct connection between a provider, like a doctor or a hospital, and the patient, but it's an informational resource. So this could be advice on the particular condition you have, or it could be very much like the fitness applications that we have right now, like the Nike Fitband or something like that. That would fall into this last category. It is a telehealth application. And reasons for why we want to get into telehealth, part of it is just that it's going to become a necessity for patient care. It's just an obvious thing. I mean, technology is in place. We have wireless technology. I think, do all of you have a smartphone by show of hands? Does anybody not have a smartphone? Right, yeah. And I don't know about you guys, this thing has changed my life as far as how I manage not only my life, my schedule, my work, but even my health too. I use fitness applications and nutritional tracking applications, none of which really satisfy me, but I keep trying them, trying to get a better one. And so it's really not just also for people with chronic conditions, people with heart issues, or people with special needs who would need that consultation. It also can benefit pretty much everyone. And whether it be someone in a rural area or someone in an urban area, there's so many innovative opportunities here for us to really kind of take charge into. Because like the internet, it has the ability to remove geographic boundaries. It has the ability to get rid of time barriers. Dr. Gupta has spoken about this before. People working the graveyard shift, working the night shift, you're not exactly at your best. And so when a patient comes in and you're providing a diagnosis or a consultation, it's almost a better system to have someone who's in the middle of their workday, who's fresh, who's ready to go, consulting over something like a Skype or a video technology, with that patient in that moment. And that's something that telehealth can facilitate. Also, this is I think one of the biggest things that will probably ever happen to medicine is to be able to monitor data continuously. So, a little story. So I have an Up band. I don't know if you guys heard this before, made by Jawbone. So it's Christmas morning, and I'm super excited to go down because I got my Up band, and I was and I admit it's my fault. I didn't really read a lot about it because I was I just kind of thought it was going to do everything and make my coffee and tell me when I've had too much coffee. But I got it and I tried it on, and it monitors my fitness activity levels. How far I've moved in the day, how many steps I've taken, how long have I been active, how long have I been sedentary. It will give me reminders of when I've been sitting for too long. Also monitors my sleep patterns. So it'll show me how long I'm in deep sleep or how long I'm in light sleep, which has helped me study, am I getting enough sleep? Am I not getting enough sleep? How long did it take me to fall asleep? But that's kind of disappointing to me, because what I'd love it for it to do is to monitor my blood pressure all day, or monitor my heart rate all day, or monitor biorhythms for the rest of my body, because that will help me actually drive into the patterns of habit that I have that I currently don't know. I don't know if when I eat a cheeseburger, it's really the right thing for me to do when I should have had a salad, and seeing my body's response to these things. I'm a data-driven person, so I want to see that kind of thing. There's medical devices on the market right now that are going through FDA trials. They're going to come out that do that. You can monitor your blood pressure all day. You can monitor blood sugar all day. You can monitor your heart rate all day. These kinds of devices are not only going to change patients' lives, but they're going to change how we develop drugs, because we're going to have so much more information to work with and to mine. Another thing which I touched on already is it also helps us move from a hospital-centric system where the only place you can get care is within a medical institution to being able to get care almost anywhere. And that will fit different patient needs. For patients that live in remote rural areas, they can't drive 6 hours to go to a hospital. It's much better for them to get a consultation over some kind of video technology, especially with a medical device that can monitor or at least provide information directly back to the doctor. So a few fast facts that we have on this, what they're estimating is there'll be at least a 25% reduction in the cost for seniors. And of course for seniors, they say that the most of your 80 to 90% of your healthcare expenditures in your life will come in the last 10 years of your life. So that is a big benefit not only to the economy and to Medicare and Medicaid, but also to seniors themselves. There's going to be a lower administrative cost going along with this, because there's less paper pushing, less scanning, less data grunt data work, because we'll have more automated systems bringing data in. And of course, twice as many rural patients can be reached per doctor, because an individual doctor who's in the middle of Kansas won't have to drive 4 hours to one patient and then 4 hours to another. Another thing this is near and dear to my heart because of what I do with my career, is that this is actually the future of drug development companies as well. If you think about it, when you go out, you see advertisements all the time. I actually got Allegra in the mail the other day. I didn't even ask for it. I got drugs in the mail. But it speaks to what they're trying to do, because a lot of companies make allergy medication. A lot of companies make a cholesterol drug. And cholesterol drugs are now cholesterol drugs, and allergy drugs are allergy drugs. The differentiation and the innovation is lower. So they have to start to differentiate their value to customers through different means. It's not just the drug alone. So I've talked to companies about this, and they're all focused on this. How can we be more valuable to our clients? How can we have more adherence of the people who take our therapies? And one of the ways to do it is to have maybe a mobile device app that comes with your diabetes therapy that gives you advice on how to live your life better, so that you potentially wouldn't need the diabetes therapy, which is kind of counterintuitive. But really, the patients expect this kind of higher touch to have higher quality health care. There's a flip side to this as well, because adherence within our industry is a really big problem. 50% of all prescriptions written are never filled, and only about 30% of prescriptions that are written are properly taken. We'll talk a little bit more about devices around that in a little bit, but that's about $300 billion with a B, dollars of direct and indirect costs to our healthcare system. So by being able to interact with patients and help them take their drugs better so that they have better results off of those therapies, these are things that are very valuable to drug companies. One other thing too, which is about this diabetes and cholesterol, the days of the blockbuster drug are starting to end, and they're starting to focus a lot more on what's called PGH in the industry, personalized genetic health. So this is being able to tailor drugs to specific populations so that you don't have all the issues when you try to use the drugs across a big cross-section of people that come from different nationalities and are different ages and have different health conditions and different diets. By targeting therapies, they'll have a greater result. This helps them collect the data for it.
I have a question. So you were saying that they're looking at the genes of the genetics of the people?
They call it personalized genetic health, but it's a little bit more than just genetic gene profiling, right? It's also patterns of behavior, it's lifestyles, it's regions. You can drive things down to a genetic level for genetic expression for why one drug would be geared towards a population or not. It's kind of more the industry acronym right now that they're going with too. Good question though. So just talk about 10 big benefits, and I try to really kind of distill this list down. I mean, you can save lives through this, which is one of the hugest benefits that you can possibly have. Being in a rural area and not having to wait 3 hours for somebody to get to you could be the difference of life or death for someone. And having somebody from a distant medical center providing you expert diagnosis, this is not just rural areas such as like Kansas or Michigan. I guess Michigan's kind of rural. This also could be emerging markets. This could be, well, we call emerging markets, emerging nations. So the subcontinent in Africa, or looking at Latin America, or looking at other places. You can give medical diagnosis and consultation from around the world. For seniors, this is a huge thing too. It's preventative care is a big thing. There's a device coming out soon that doesn't require too much wires or tape. You can just kind of wear it. That can detect if you're going to have a heart attack between 1 week and 1 day before you actually have it. And it will send you a text message. So your doctor gets a message, and you get a text message saying, BT dubs, you're going to have a heart attack in like a week, so you probably should go to the hospital now. And these kinds of preventative care is huge for people, because you can actually save lives and stop things from happening. You get a question?
You said in one of the previous slides that there's an estimate that about 80% of data is unstructured. Would it be safe to assume that the reason for that, one, has it always been that way, that most of the data that industries, I assume this is industries in general, not just health industry.
Right.
So has it always been that way? And if so, would it be attributed, the amount of unstructured data, would it be attributed to the fact that we're getting so much more data? It's grown exponentially since even a few years ago. We just don't know how to handle it.
The percentage of unstructured versus structured data is actually going down, and has been going down. Because what structured data means is more than just a file system, like an organization, like a table of contents. It's the metadata associated with it, which makes it navigable and searchable. So we're seeing that number going down, but your observation is correct that it's kind of fighting with itself, because as data is exploding, especially data that's unstructured. Because if you look at yourself, you are actually just gigabytes of data over the course of your life in the health industry. And I've been through different hospitals from different states, and none of my data is integrated. I don't have it. The only thing I have is a kind of a little folder, and that's all I got. That's all I can hold on to right now. But that's a big problem. The other part of it too is that scanning is, a lot of hospitals have a lot of paper records. And I think the last time, I have another slide on it though, it's not part of this deck though, a number of hospitals are spending over $100 million just to scan in their paper, each. Right? And that data gets structured along the way so that it can then be navigable later on. But that's a huge effort, right? So going forward, data is becoming more and more structured, so hopefully that will eventually go down. Part of it's also because there's no nationwide health information exchange, a way to kind of standardize and share data. One hospital's got one system, one hospital's got another system. They don't talk to each other.
I think we need like a standardized structure for the whole world.
You're right. You're right. There's what a lot of us in the industry talk about is the concept of what is called adaptive licensing, where I don't market a drug just to the US or market a drug just to the EU. I market it to the world, but I don't market it to everybody. I market it to, men ages 52 to 57, right? And I start there. And then when that's okay, then I go men now 57 to 62. So it's a rolling process where you prove that a drug works well across the world, and then it gets fine-tuned, But that requires an information exchange behind it, a standardization. And that's one of the biggest problems. How do you create a data structure? One of you has got to figure this out. How do you create a data structure to store every single doctor visit that anyone could ever have, both now and in the future? You can't, if you tried to do it all at once, it would never happen. So it's something that has to be extensible, and we've got to work that out. And we've been working on it for years. And I think we just got through dental visits, and that's about where we are. All right, some cool initiatives that are going on, and I'll come back to a couple of things. Clinical research portals is a really hot thing in the industry right now, and in the areas that I work in. So when drugs are researched, right, they're researched by clinical sites, by clinical investigators. These are doctors, right, who test the drug, literally, on people. They got fine constraints. They have a lot of paperwork. There's a regulatory aspect to it, and they have to be compliant. Right now, if I'm Dr. Jones and I'm doing 3 different clinical studies, I have 3 different systems, I have 3 different sets of passwords, nothing talks to each other, and that's annoying because I don't want to do that. I'm a doctor. I don't want to have to use 3 different computers and carry them around with me everywhere I go. So what the industry is looking towards is consolidating them into a standardized authentication framework, right, which will store their information and give me one password that I can use regardless of what company I work in. And so those are the kinds of things that we're working on now and some of our other peers in the industry are doing. So that way they can just log in through a mobile device and log into a clinical trial portal for their company and have that secure exchange between patient and the sponsor. And the really excellent part of that is when they're doing research on drugs, you don't want to wait 2 weeks to find out that something didn't go well, especially when other patients are getting tested simultaneously. There's regulatory requirements about the time that you have to report things, like 24 hours if somebody dies, 2 weeks if somebody just has a headache. But with these kinds of systems, the data comes back right away. So you can see in real time how patients are doing, and that improves patient care, improves drug development, and improves safety. This is the other big one, which we talked about, which is like with the framework. This is kind of where we are today, right? So we have electronic medical records. I go into a hospital, they have a system. There may be any number of a dozen different vendors that make them. And this system stores all the information about me in the hospital. So all the data that is collected about me, everything that's done is stored in this information system that's specific to the hospital and the care that they provide. It doesn't necessarily match up one-to-one with another company or another hospital. It doesn't necessarily mean that they'll be able to communicate. And there's a challenge to it too, because if you think about it, healthcare is both qualitative and quantitative. So if the doctor only has 5 checkboxes to click, and what he needs to ask me isn't one of those checkboxes, what does he enter? So there's some criticism about how the system, how the data can be managed, right? Maybe unstructured data is slightly better because then you can mine it versus trying to overtly structure it. And that's the second problem over here with electronic health records. So that's the idea that a hospital doesn't have my record. I have my record, it's in the cloud or it's somewhere, and wherever I go, they can have access to it and download it, and they can use it, right? That's my whole health record. So chronic conditions will always be there, and that's always something that we're going to have to manage, and telehealth is a huge help with that, changing the relationship between providers and patients. On the other side, medication adherence, we talked a little bit about that. So if you're going to prescribe drugs to people and are not going to take them, what's the point? So how can we better motivate and also educate people to understand the positives of taking drugs and also the negatives if they don't follow through with the therapies? Antibiotics is a good example. Anybody ever have antibiotics? All of you. And everybody tells you, always finish your prescription. And you never do, and you get bronchitis afterwards, and you're going back to the doctor. So that's the classic example, right? Remote patient monitoring, a really big thing. And of course, this is not just patients. This is, monitoring yourself in a device and being able to share that. The only cool thing about the Upband, and this is an example of remote patient monitoring. So I have the app on my phone. So does my sister. My sister has an Upband. My sister lives in Cairo, in Egypt. And so every day, and literally in like real time, every time we sync up our devices, she sees my results and I see her results. And so we're like motivate each other to stay active. So when I've sat around too long, she sends me a message on WhatsApp, which now has 50 billion users apparently. And, she's like, I saw you were lazy yesterday, and gives me crap about it. She's like, I walked 10,000 steps. I'm like, of course you're in Cairo. Communication between patient and provider. This is an area that actually sometimes gets some hits, right? There's a classic view, right, that you want to be in front of your doctor, right? That you want to be there with them, and that's the right way to have a doctor-patient relationship. You go into the office, you sit down, they tell you stuff, you wear that weird gown and everything else. It's much better, in my mind, to be able to have people meet where they're at in the moments they need to be. And my sister and I are no less close because we talk on Skype all the time. It's like having her in the room. I work for a company where I work from home. The company's based someplace else. We use webcams all the time, and we use Skype, and we use everything else. It really, you can, it's nice to meet somebody for the first time, but after that, it doesn't keep you from doing work with them. So I actually don't agree with saying that the patient-provider relationship would be hampered. I think it's even better. Because if the doctor has more data about you, compiled through time, through monitoring devices and things like that, then when they talk to you, they know that, Bobby, you didn't take your medication, or you ate too much cheesecake yesterday, and I saw your blood sugar level spike. so that it's actually going to improve, I think, the communication. Because one of the problems that a lot of people have, I think probably have all experienced it, you don't have to admit to it, you go to the doctor asks you questions, and maybe there's some things you want to leave out, you know, or some things that you don't, or questions that you forget to ask, right? So we're becoming more informed, not through communications technologies, through health information technologies, so we can ask better questions. And so by having more data as a patient, we're more educated and can ask better questions of our providers, and therefore get to an equitable resolution a lot easier. Personal health management, preventative health management, really. So being able to track your diet, track your exercise, these things are great. I mean, this is a great start. But, you know, for me, for example, I don't know, like, all right, so I drink a beer every now and then, and my nose runs a little bit. I don't know why. Is it because I ate something sweet with it? Is it because I have a gluten allergy? Am I suddenly allergic to alcohol? I have no idea. It's not going to stop me from drinking beer. But every now and then, you know, and it doesn't happen all the time. But so with these kinds of management tools, maybe I do have a spike in my blood sugar. Maybe there is something I'm allergic to. Maybe technology can help me get to those answers. Because if I knew it, I would change my behavior. And people want to be healthier and want to live longer. They don't often have enough data to make them to really know that they shouldn't or should do something. And that's a really tough part of clinical research too, because I mean, drugs are one thing to test for efficacy, but everybody eats a different diet, you know, everybody's got a different heritage and comes from different places. We're very complicated. We're big piles of data. So how do we sift through that and actually know? Being able to monitor your own health because you know yourself and know your moods and know who you are, that's a really important thing. Not only the fact that that data, if aggregated, can be incredibly valuable to develop better therapies. Clinical support tools. This is not just a matter of you know, clinical research. This is also like the example I gave about my friend who's an EMT in a helicopter. It could be devices that are in hospitals for remote consultations. It could be diagnostic machines that are hooked up to a central database that can query other data. Anything you can imagine in a hospital setting that can be hooked up to the internet is basically telehealth, right? Reference tools, that's the other big thing too. I mean, by digitizing, I think that's the other thing. So 50 petabytes of data is everything written since the beginning of recorded history by mankind in every language. It's kind of cool too. By having reference tools so that you don't have to go back to the textbook, so you can have information on demand, so you can query that data, so that data has structure, so that you can organize and filter that data so that the best data comes to the top. That's going to be very, very important, not only for patients, but really for healthcare professionals. Because ongoing training is part of every health professional's lives. They have to constantly be recertified or retested, demonstrate that you're improving your knowledge, staying up on current trends, learning about emerging therapies. That's kind of, you know, the information that can be delivered through these kinds of technologies. So, before I talk to you a little bit about, you know, getting into the telehealth space and some avenues, it doesn't show up too well in this, but there's a broad spectrum here, right? So there's clinical on one side. This is healthcare technologies that are in the hospital setting and clinical research setting. They're specific to telemedicine, the delivery of therapies by a certified provider. And on the other side, we have consumer health and wellness, right? Which is everything from your Fit Up bands and Fitbits or whatever. These are the kind of interfaces that we can use to collecting data that can actually be provided over to the clinical side. Or it just generally assumes that this is more in the consumer market. It's more about health and wellness. It's more about healthy diet. It's not necessarily to treat a certain condition. So the FDA is looking at this right now and is very laser beam focused on trying to draw that line. Because if I'm going to give you discrete advice on, it's one thing for diabetes to say, don't eat that cheesecake. Okay, fine, don't eat the cheesecake. It's another thing to provide a certified advice as would come from a doctor through a web app. That is something that the FDA hasn't figured out how to regulate yet. And they're not honestly going to figure out for a couple of years. They'll issue guidances on it and eventually come to a decision. So if you're looking at starting or getting into this telehealth business, the most important place to start is just figure out where you lie, right? What are your interests in? What are you passionate about? I'm more on the clinical side personally, but I really like the consumer side. But for the business that I'm in, you know, we're driven on setting up, on dealing with the unstructured data, on setting a foundation so that data can be used to change the future of patient health and change the future of healthcare. That's what my passion, that's what I'm committed to for my career. On the other side of things, I mean, there's lots of consumer health and wellness applications, and then there's a gray area in between. So you want to get an understanding of where you want to be in that and what really jazzes you up. Because that will influence your business model, it will influence the market that you're going to try to target, and it will influence the legality, regulation, and compliance issues that you may have to deal with both now and then also in the future. But there's a lot of models that we see with the applications that we get today that apply directly to telehealth, right? So people can pay to download telehealth applications. There's paid-for applications that are right in the telehealth space in the Apple Store. They run from 99 cents to over $300 based upon what it is, right? So people can pay to do that. That's a business model. You can have something ad-based, for example, like WebMD.com. You can download their app. It's ad-based. That's how they get their revenue through it. But they're providing you information, and that's how they fund it. You can do in-app purchases, so maybe you want to upgrade your application, get a new module or get a new feature. Running applications are famous for this, or workout applications, you want to unlock those extra workouts, that variation on push-ups. You pay a little extra and get that module and you can do it. Hardware accessories, of course, this is medical devices through and through. There are just so many different kinds of things. I'll give you a couple examples in a second, but there are so many different types of devices that are coming out, like Upband and everything else, and the sky's the limit for that. I mean, that's literally, it's going to explode. It's going to be huge. It's going to be everywhere. We'll talk more about that in a second. And of course, subscription models. And that is where, like academic journals, things like that, being able to have privileged information that you want that is either under copyright or something else that you want to give people access to, and they pay for the subscription, and then you get that content. We see the same model with like Spotify if you use that for downloading music, right? And you guys use Spotify, by the way, for music? Yeah, of course you do, Dr. Gupta. You say you're not into technology. So, but I mean, that's changed the way I look at music. It's a subscription model, but that's how they pay for it. Like my $10 a month gets me all the music that I want when I always wanted that. So some examples of some things, right? So Hemoglobe is an anemia detector. They're targeting this device to be less than $20 a piece. It comes out of a grant, which is actually funded by the Bill Gates and Melinda Gates Foundation. And what they want to do is basically create a very cheap solution that can be easily connected to a smart tooth, a smartphone, not even the smartest of smartphones for that matter, and detect anemia and be able to track anemia so that they can actually make epidemiological adjustments to both whole areas as well as provide better therapies and collect better data on anemia and the causes of it. This is a really cool one that it has a lot of potential for emerging countries or developing nations. Another one, Vital Arts and Science. The FDA recently approved this. This is one of the big apps that actually just got approved. And this is for people with macular degeneration, degeneration of eyesight. There's nutritional roots to this too. But this app allows you to test. So this is kind of like a quantitative, qualitative test, right? So it allows you to check your vision every day. So the doctor then gets that information and can track versus going and having your eyesight checked once every 3 months and being like, your eyesight got worse. Okay. But if you're tracking it at a regular interval, you may see that there were other events. It could be stress in your life or something that you did, or some kind of nutritional thing that caused your eyesight to get worse. And so this app will facilitate that. Again, better data, and it also alerts your healthcare professional if something changes. So it's strengthening that relationship between provider and patient. Smart pill bottle. This is actually a super, super cool one. So the bottle itself is recycled. The bottle itself is disposable. It has to be because it's containing medication. But the electronics are reusable. You'll start getting these actually pretty soon. I'm thinking maybe 6 months or so. We're really going to start seeing these things come out. So the sensor tracks the patients and when you take, how much you take and when you take it, right, out of the bottle, because it can weigh it and measure the medication in there. And that's really cool because there's the adherence aspect of it, right? Which is a big problem, as I talked about. The other part of it, which is even cooler to me, is being able to study behavioral patterns. This is the socioeconomic behaviors around medication taking. So by mining that data, we can figure out how better to annoy people to take their medication, or remind them, depending upon which they prefer, or how to track trends across different types of medications. So people are really good at taking their diabetes medication, but very poor at taking their allergy medication or something. So you can see these kinds of trends, and that can be mapped and influence strategies for these companies to educate their consumers and also to provide better care. You may have seen this on TV with Verizon, the creepy robot guy. So this is also FDA approved. This is an autonomous telehealth robot. This guy will navigate through a busy ER around obstacles and people, even when it's like crazy busy. And it allows this guy, whoever that guy is, who may be states away or half a country away through a video technology, to interact with patients. Not only that, through wireless technologies or otherwise like USB sticks even, patient data can be loaded right into the system, wirelessly over Bluetooth for example, and fed to them. So they're actually seeing data, they're seeing the patient, and the patient's interacting with them in real time, and this thing can move around on its own, so you don't have to like drag it across the ER. So, because when you're busy saving lives, the last thing you want to do is to have to drag this robot across the room. So these things we'll see a lot more often, and they're positioning this to also be integrated with an electronic health record standard. So the idea, and this is what I was kind of getting back to, is these kinds of devices and solutions hit the market and leverage these standards. They put weight on the industry to adopt the standards. And that's one of the best ways to do it, because if we just talk around standards for 5 years, we get nothing done. Another really cool one, which is one of the last ones, the last one I'll leave up with. So this was created by Oregon State University, and this is this little chip, it's about a postage size. Costs less than 25 cents to make, monitors your movement, monitors all your vital signs, monitors everything about what you're doing. And it's 25 cents, which means that you can make this disposable, you can put this into clothing, you can, if you have a patient, for example in a disaster scenario, you have one of these things in a sticker, you slap it to them, and by Bluetooth, this thing's automatically communicating to a central server. You can deal with a lot more information and pull it in a much shorter period of time. So they're going for FDA approval, which is sponsored by the Linus Pauling Institute. And they're going to commercialize it around middle of this year, or patenting it. So these devices, it's great because the device is there. But this device on an open standard is going to allow us to pull this data into any number of different kinds of apps. So if you have an app for a specific health condition or a specific type of person or a specific age group, you'll be able to use and leverage these technologies. And that's one of the key things about records or patients or data or everything else, is that the data has to be there. There's a tremendous amount of it. Now that the data is going to be more omnipresent and will be there, it's going to facilitate a whole new market of innovation for medical apps or consumer health apps.
My question was that a lot of your slides are focused more on the treatment and the cure part of the disease and health, but you don't have much to do with the prevention part of it. I don't see much focus on that.
Right. So the question, just going to repeat for the camera, was that there's not a lot of focus on prevention in the slide deck. There's a lot of focus on treatment, right? And that's absolutely true. If you actually look at the healthcare market, it's mostly focused on treatment. I was just giving a statistic, the Obamacare budget, healthcare budget, so 0.004% of the budget is actually for prevention. The rest of it's all for treatment. It's been an industry thing for a long time, and because prevention is both, can be counterintuitive to the business model, right? So you don't want to put yourself out of business for people not taking your things, so people sometimes just ignore it. Also, prevention's tough, because how do you give people advice on certain things to eat or activities to do? We do that all the time, be more active, be more fit, things like that. But how do you contextualize prevention? And so that's actually a big open gap in the industry that's looking to be addressed. And you see a lot of things starting happening now with like WebMD and their subscription service, devices, fitness applications are all becoming more prevention oriented. So I have, I'm doing the Tough Mudder at the end of in a month and a half, right? And I signed up and I get like news alerts with dietary advice for me on how to like eat right so I don't get injured during Tough Mudder. I'll probably still get injured during Tough Mudder, but that preventional stuff makes me happy. It's what people want. So the traditional health industry isn't doing enough for that. So maybe these kinds of solutions could do a lot more. You're absolutely right with that. Question?
Is it a concern to you or conceivable to you that what might interfere with the outcome of telehealth is simply a sufficient amount of people may simply not want to wear a bracelet or any sort of one extra thing to keep track of in life?
Right. I think your voice probably came up through clear, but that's an awesome question, and I was just giving an example during the break. So my friend's got the Nike Fitband, and I have an Up bracelet, right? His Fitband is a clock. It looks kind of cool too, right? And it fits really nicely. So he wears it all the time because it's a watch, and he clicks on it and it does a cool little graphic thing, and it's a watch. This is an annoying bracelet, right? So I don't wear this all the time. So usability is huge, and that will make or break a product in this space. If it's something that's embedded in clothing or embedded in something else, like a necklace or something, and you don't see it, then that's one thing. But if it's something that somebody's going to wear, it's got to have the kinds of features around it that are going to make it engaging, might make it fashionable, might make it something that people aren't going to feel embarrassed or uncomfortable to have on. So that's a definite barrier for that, because a lot of people love the Up Band. I think it's moderately neato. Some people don't like it at all, and so people will form product allegiances, and so you'll start seeing products that have different designs that do the exact same thing, just because it meets different people with different lifestyles and different preferences, or different colors, for that kind of thing. So, good question. Others? I can point to all of you.
Well, I always have a lot of questions.
You've been taking notes.
Well, the first one which is there is the definitions that you used of telehealth and telemedicine. If you look at the recent legislation from different states relating to telemedicine and telehealth, they've actually gone from telemedicine and started using the word telehealth much more in the recent legislation states. And in the way they've done the preamble, they are essentially suggesting that telehealth is a broader term than telemedicine, which is somewhat different from the way that you have used it in this one.
Yeah.
Where have your definitions come from, and do you see this contradictory trend taking place, which I also find for a number of evolving fields, which is there, that definitions are not
and the honest answer is the definitions that I have just come from industry. So it comes from interacting with other health professionals, the people that have consulted as part of preparing this and working through the initiatives that I have. Now, and I can back up to that slide. Certain industry associations have formed their own opinions on what telemedicine is versus what telehealth is. So part of that, I think, is going to influence my personal decision making. I think that you're right, though, that it's drifting as far as what is going to be the official designation. Telehealth may be the broader context. Telemedicine might be something, but then health, I've heard that HIT, health information technologies, could be that, the definition of what I just gave telehealth to be, right?
My next question is that in a number of industries, what we find is that having more information sometimes is helpful, but sometimes is actually a problem. Remember doing a study years ago for the US Air Force, looking in the area of how new design information can help in the maintenance of a plane. And in one case, a person was repairing a plane and doing a minor repair to the plane. And that person got 400,000 pages of results from wind tunnel experiments, which was really a distraction rather than helpful.
Right.
So we essentially come with this paradigm: the more data we have, the more helpful it is. And sometimes, even in my personal case, when I've gone to a doctor, and there's an increasing number of tests which are done on a preventative basis every year, and one of the tests, because there are like 60 of them being done, one will come out to be wrong, and then you go in for supplementary tests and all that kind of a thing. I don't know whether there's a good solution to it, but sometimes more information is not really helpful. It's really a distraction or not. Is there been any thought given to this area? What is the right magnitude of information?
So I'll give you some examples of what's going on in the industry. So mature processes, right? Conducting a clinical trial, or for example, getting a drug approved with a health authority like the FDA. Those used to be things where you collected a massive amount of data, a massive amount of different content, and you'd submit everything you have. And gradually, as they kind of narrowed down what questions and what data was needed, the data structures that they used for these things are becoming more and more refined. And as a result, and this is getting to the point here, companies then have the assurance to say, okay, I have the data that I need, this is the structured data that I need, and everything else that I have, I can let go of. So data retention and data destruction policies are huge, because we're collecting all this data. We don't need to keep all of it. On the other side of things, when you're collecting metrics or health data about the results of drugs, I think my personal opinion is that if academia especially has access to that kind of data, we could be mining that data to try to find values and hidden corners that we previously weren't able to see. And so I wouldn't want to say we shouldn't collect all this health informatics because we don't know what to do with it. I'd rather say, let's figure out what to do with it, and then when we figure it out, then we can get rid of everything else. That's in that same kind of context or domain. Right, so even with going on with a lot of companies now, they keep everything, all of their records, all their documents across the board, 100-year retention policy. And they're all starting to look at that and saying, some of these companies have been around. I was just with a pharma company that's 160 years old, and they're moving from an old system to a brand new system. And now they got to make the decision of how much of our 160 years do we need to keep, right? And so the same thing with this technology. If we're collecting all this information, how do we destroy it too? Or how do we let that go? And maybe most of it should be. Keep the structured pieces and let go of the other parts because you're going to constantly keep collecting more anyway. Maybe that's a strategy to go with it.
Now, the examples that you took of actual products and products which are currently in the market, which are likely to come in the market, I got the impression almost all of them were US-based products and services at this point in time. What do you see is happening on the international scene? Are there some prominent efforts being done in foreign countries, products and services coming out?
Not really, actually. I mean, I've seen granted there is innovation, especially coming out of France and the UK, but even in the research I was doing just to get current on this, they all have a US element of collaboration. It seems that the majority of innovation right now is coming out of the US. Now, the field trials of these things, though, are global. So an anemia detector and qualifying that in Africa, or trying to make sure that you have a network that can pull in information that's really globally available. They're international efforts, and they may have international intentions, but I really actually found very little that's going on in out of the European market. And mind you, getting medical devices approved in Europe is a lot more complicated than it is in the United States.
What about Japan, for example?
Japan's interesting because Japan is the second largest pharmaceutical market in the world, second largest consumer market for drugs. Though they, from a regulatory standpoint, are pretty far behind the rest of the other countries. They, generally speaking, wait for drugs to be approved in Europe or devices for that matter. They look for it to be approved in Europe or the FDA first. Countries are just now starting to approve drugs first in Japan. Part of that's cultural, part of that is the fact that they've evolved their systems and their technologies. And it was only a couple years ago that Japan reformed their regulatory agency to deal with these challenges because people found it so onerous to approve products there that it took 3 times as long and was just as expensive that they just didn't. So, and that's a shame because it's the second largest market in the world. So they've made big inroads to this. I see Japan as being an area of big innovation coming up. So.
And contrast this to the situation in China, where the drug consumption is one of the lowest in the world.
Yep.
On a per capita basis.
And China just formed a regulatory agency a couple months ago. So it's been called the CFDA, but it's actually now an official global regulatory health authority. So that you'll see China is just an enormous emerging market, but having worked in China before, it's a challenge to work with them because of the differences in their privacy laws and rules and legislation. So it's difficult to get into that market unless you have a very strong international presence already. I could see them because of the size of patients that the population that they have. I think it could be huge. I think and the same thing goes for India. India has different interpretations on trademarks, copyright, and privacy, and that has been a limiter for U.S. companies specifically that are very concerned about protecting their products and making sure that they're not copied or duplicated. And so India, but then again, has 1 billion people, so it's going to be a force in the marketplace regardless, right?
Now the devices that you mentioned, almost all of them fall in the category where they're self-defining devices, in the sense the band which you have, you don't need a doctor at the other end to be monitoring what the signals are. The bulk of the devices that you mentioned fall in that category, correct?
It depends. And so the bulk of the devices I mentioned are collecting data, health informatics about the human body. what we're missing for a lot of these things is the proxy. So, for example, it's cool that I have a 25-cent. Let's go. It's cool that I have this 25-cent chip that can collect this data, but they haven't created the app yet, which is something that they'll do to be able to collect that information and visualize it to you. The question then is, how do I send this data securely and privately to a health provider, right? So, and from a doctor's standpoint, do I want to use yet another system, right, to facilitate this process, or wouldn't I rather have this integrated into the patient's medical record or into my internal hospital system? So that proxy level is not ready yet. And it's the same analogy that goes with computers. Like hardware has outpaced software utilization of hardware for a long time. So now that we're, hardware is as speedy as we really need it to be, software quality's got to come up to meet it, to use the resources that are available. And hence our ability to have touchscreen computers and things like that now. So yeah, to your point, what I'm showing is technologies that need apps. And they need apps from multiple providers, actually, to make sure that we actually really get the healthy competition in the marketplace to allow the best features to come out.
I have heard that they're planning to put some chips, basically like a cyber kind of thing, where they will put a chip in your body. Is that like something you have heard about, or do you expect it?
So the question is about implantable medical devices, specifically around health information. I know it's kind of a, maybe a doomsday scenario, but I mean, they've talked about like being able to have an embedded sensor, or an embedded piece of information, the little thing that like you see on like TV shows and spy thrillers. I don't know if that would actually ever really get through the courts, very well for the general human population. It wouldn't be mandatory for that matter. But you can do that right now for your dog. You can implant a little chip in your dog that would, allow somebody to identify your dog with a wireless device. And then there's other devices that are going to come around specifically for, there's a lot of good opportunities for this with chemotherapy, where an implantable device with the drug in it can release the drug at regular intervals. So for example, you have a little pill-shaped object next to a tumor that you have, and it releases little doses of chemo at a regular interval just to that area of your body. That's much better than doing it intravenously. And then of course there's also the longer term dream of being able to have like nanobots and robots that do surgery within the human body, so that you don't have to have major surgery, or especially for like heart surgery and things like that, where it's so damaging to the human body to get in there in the first place. Do you have a question?
Currently, doctors' offices require patient to document consent before their information is sent to even another doctor's office. And I'm wondering if you'd say it's just inevitable that telehealth will decrease standards of how much privacy a patient could expect to be entitled to.
Yeah, and I don't think so. I think the privacy that you need to be entitled, I think it's one of those things that could be, let me take it back. So the question I ask people all the time is, let's say you have a chronic health condition, right? And you've had a lot of treatments, and there's just no therapy that's there to cure you. And I asked the question to you and said, well, listen, if I took your data, I didn't have your name, but if I put your data and made it public so that people could do research on it, there's more likely they were going to find a cure. If you have a chronic health condition, most people I ask say, absolutely, I would do that. All the healthy people I ask say, absolutely not, right? So as a society, it's something to look at. HIPAA compliance is there for a reason. And I don't see those regulations necessarily going away. A patient should have a right. This is your health information. You should have a right to control how it's shared, especially when someone's going to use that to potentially market something to you. And also the threat of potentially some kind of insurance complication because someone knows about a pre-existing condition or something else. So I don't really see it going away, but I do see there needs to be some kind of flexibility where patients, such as the patient in the chronic condition case, could be able to designate data for clinical research. Not just like today where they will designate their body for clinical research by saying, I'll participate in a study, or I'll try this new therapy because this other therapies haven't worked out for me. So, in which case you are committing the data as well. Other questions from people who haven't asked questions?
Do you know of any, health insurance companies that engage with their, clients the same way you and your sister engage, using is it Jump?
Up. whatever.
I'm sorry.
That's cool.
Engaging, and do you think that that's going to be something that'll be happening in the future?
Right, that's an interesting paradigm because so health insurance companies have an incentive for you to stay healthy, right? They also are paying a lot of costs for people who aren't. So we see a lot today with like websites and a lot of Blue Cross Blue Shield has got a lot of branded solutions for different patient populations, for diabetes care, for wellness, for the different kinds of things that they educate people on. And though I personally don't have any apps myself, if they don't already exist, I wouldn't be surprised if those kinds of educational apps are there, providing you better information. Now, what I don't necessarily see from a health insurance company, and this is because of privacy laws, amongst other things, is that they're going to be collecting any data from your medical devices, right? They may be informed of that through a health professional, but it's really more of the doctor-patient relationship for those kinds of things. But I do see them using aspects of telehealth specifically around reference information and and just education and prevention to be able to better deliver, have a healthier patient population, which is more economically viable for them. So healthcare premiums have gotten very expensive because of the rise in cost of healthcare, right? But I don't, though health insurance companies have the financial incentive to continue to have the kind of profits and that they do, ultimately they don't want their costs to go up, and so having a healthier population could benefit that. Yes, sir.
You mentioned early on that having all these different product devices will be a good dynamic for people.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think the current rates of scientific literacy that accommodate that? Like, do you think
I need the last sentence one more time. Current rate of
Do
what?
you think the current rates of scientific literacy would, sorry about this, the rates of scientific literacy would sort of counteract that? Do you think people will convert those data? The same possibility where there's a device that's so much data on it that you kind of
Right.
use and kind of do more harm than good.
Right, and so I'm going to repeat your question, but he brings up a really good point. So what do you do with all this data for people who don't understand the data? Scientific illiteracy, right? We are not health professionals. I'm not a doctor, right? So how do you manage the interpretation of that data and advise someone on the right thing to do? So that's what the FDA is looking at right now, and that's the big challenge, right? So if I'm collecting this data, it's one thing for me to say, it's one thing for me to look at the basics and understand basic stuff for me, how I slept and how many steps I took today is great. But to look at more complicated data around blood pressure, blood sugar levels, things like that, there may be a real definitive need, and there is a definitive need, for expert advice, certified expert advice to be provided based upon that data, whether it's provided through a computer algorithm that interprets it according to standards, or it's feedback that's comes from a healthcare professional that's reviewing that data, that ultimately will need to be regulated. Which means that the FDA and the EMA or CFDA or PMDA or any of these other regulatory agencies is going to need to basically approve that that device does not change the information being provided in an adverse way so that it's incorrect, or it does not limit people from being able to provide the advice, right? And that the advice, when it leaves the doctor's lips and gets to the patient, is the same. So it doesn't change along the way. So we'll definitely see that. But that's, with this emerging class of information technologies, what the FDA will do is they'll release guidances for a while, they'll watch the industry, and they'll say, this is how you should do it, right? And if you don't do it that way, that's okay, but you gotta have a really good story about why you're not, right? Because they don't assume to know everything. And eventually that will give way to regulation, which is this is the legal way that you have to do it. Other questions?
So I guess as more of this continues to happen, do you see a revolution coming from people who understand
violent
how
revolution.
from people who understand how to take the data and present it to their customers, or
Mm-hmm.
who have the Nike Fuel Band or
Mm-hmm.
that you have, and say, maybe we don't need to get professionals to tell us this is what you need to do. But
It's a tough-
form of a community.
It's a tough question to answer, but we are a society that is more community driven, I think, than we actually kind of recognize. And you see a lot of that today within the health and wellness field on the consumer side, right? The organic markets popping up on every other street. Whole Foods is a huge corporation. People working out together, like CrossFit is a huge business right now. So I think as people are brought together by technology, naturally they're sharing information. So it's tough as a medical community, because ultimately, from a legal standpoint, right, that information has to be approved health claims. What I think it does as far as the revolutionary aspect is I think it's going to give us more data on how to establish that certain things are good for us or bad for us. If you look at out at the industry, it's a great story to look into how the omega-3 fatty acids or vitamin D and calcium or selenium, the process by which those became approved health claims with the FDA had to go to the Supreme Court multiple times. Because the FDA did not want to admit that vitamin D is good for your health, right? Because the data is kind of subject, right? Because people eat all kinds of different diets. How do you just say vitamin D is really good for you? You know, when vitamin D actually by itself needs calcium and other trace minerals to actually even work in the human body. So I think with more data around these things on all different sides, it may help us get more information and better quality regulation around certain things, but we'll also be allowed to provide more advice. So I think that I'm kind of circling around your question. I don't think we'll ever get rid of the need for the patient-doctor relationship when it comes to expert medical care. These are people who have dedicated their lives and very long periods of school to study things very deeply, and that their disciplines are continuing to evolve and become more detailed and more knowledgeable. These technologies will help with that, right? But on the more consumer side, I think that the general level of knowledge that we have about our health and about what we do and how it affects our health is going to increase dramatically. And so that will just improve the overall success rates of people in resolving health issues. You first. You haven't asked a question yet.
So with this telehealth thing, do you think that the curriculum for the doctors and nurses will change?
Okay, so the question, yes, the question was, with the rise of telehealth, will the curriculum for doctors and nurses change, right? What they need to study in school? I think it's inevitable that it would have to. If a lot of my friends who are in the direct healthcare profession, who are nurses or doctors and everything, they're constantly training on the new technologies that are coming in, right? So, for example, it used to be you would fill out a paper chart at the end of a patient's bed, on their results, and now you use an iPad and you put that data in and click send. So there's training that's constantly done in those kinds of technologies. I think there's going to be additional technology training that's going to be needed just to orient them to electronic health records and medical records and what does it mean to work with them, right? So I think that, this technology will be factored in, but I don't think it's necessary. It may come into school, but it would be more impactful and probably more prevalent in the workplace, where you actually use the technologies, you don't just study what they are.
Actually, recently this was the first semester, there's this course of entrepreneurial health informatics, and we just started, because I'm working with the doctor who's actually teaching the course. So I think it's a good idea to get it started in the universities,
Yeah.
like that, so that it's interdisciplinary, so
Yeah,
it's gonna help
I absolutely agree. And so her observation that is, it's a great idea. The Pace University has a course, entrepreneurial health informatics, is that what it is? Right, and that it's a great idea to introduce these types of technology concepts more earlier in the educational cycle, and I could not agree more. The more you know about technology, and because the more it becomes prevalent within our lives, especially in the health field, the better positioned you are to use the technology and also help the industry make the technology better. So that is, and I think it also, like the discussion today, it opens up ideas for how you can specialize your career and what you want to do in the field. Because there's a lot of different, very specialized roles in the health field right now. It's very difficult for people coming out of med school or other kinds of training to pick exactly what they want to go into that they're going to care the most about.
Yeah, my question was related to the previous question asked by the gentleman over there. So you were saying that the doctors would, they've been studying a lot and stuff like that, and you would still need the doctors to be there. And you probably have heard of this IBM Watson, and it's basically a supercomputer running these complex algorithms.
Watson from the Jeopardy TV show, right?
Exactly. So if you have companies like IBM, they can come up with these kind of technologies, and let's say they build a framework, it could get if it gets FDA approved, which is basically you have a robot which is
Right.
giving you your diagnosis.
Well, you know,
And that would mean basically the doctors won't have to go and work. Because there's one more example. If I want to give you that they created this particular algorithm, and the scientists had these robots doing the research, and they were doing this genetic testing, and they came up with some new
Right.
results.
Right.
So they were even not doing testing it, but the robots were able to find something new.
right. So the question was around the use of robotics and autonomous technologies to be able to do interpretive analysis of the data that's collected and or provide feedback or interact with patients, right? And though I, for one, would love to bow down to our robot overlords, I think, you know, there's a lot of cases to be made for example, like laser eye surgery is a lot more automated today, right? You know, and a lot of surgeries can be done more effectively with the precision that robotics can give us. Research can be done. Computer algorithms can be run to do statistical analysis and modeling. In fact, all this big data modeling is most likely going to be run off something like a Watson. But at the end of the day, I mean, human health has a subjective quality to it too. You know, there's a qualitative and quantitative element to it. So whereas Watson may be able to recommend, you know, based on statistical models that this person should do this, it's, you know, at the granular level, we are different from each other. So, I mean, we maybe share 99.99999% of everything else. But, I mean, are patients going to accept that advice ultimately? You know, are patients going to want to interact? It may be food for thought. It may be part of the informational awareness I talked about having these kinds of systems to take large amounts of data and provide you with feedback about this. It's better to have computers to do that in my mind than have humans do it, right? But the interpretive analysis of what it really means and how to implement it, there's still this social dynamic that we have to manage because, you know, emotions and statistics are part of every decision, really. You know, we don't, as human beings, we don't make decisions without an emotional subcomponent. And so I think it's important for that patient-doctor relationship, though it may be more informed, it's still part of that because you still have to, you know, computer's not going to, you know, when Watson tells you to go home and feel better, it's a lot different than when like your doctor who you've known for a long time is like, I want you to go home and feel better because I want to see you healthy. You know, because you know he cares or she cares.
I mean, basically my point is that the system like a Watson, with running with complex algorithms and huge amount of data, would probably give you 99% of times a better decision about diagnosis regarding the disease. And doctors would, if let's say it is working late nights and stuff,
Absolutely.
you would have a robot which is like giving you advice whenever you want, and you don't need to worry about people working in India in nighttime or US in the daytime.
And that's a very good observation he's making about the, you know, the quality of data coming out being consistent and of higher quality because it doesn't have the humanistic aspect of people being tired or not focused and things like that. And, you know, that's absolutely correct. I mean, there could be a better efficacy coming out of that diagnosis and data. Part of the problem is that we don't have enough data, right? So it's like something that the company I work for now is helping companies structure their data so that later on, after they've collected it for a long time in a structured format, then they can go look at it. So, you know, we don't have enough structured data right now that's organized, so maybe something like a Watson that can go through the unstructured data and make structure out of it and then do interpretive analysis off it is something that is really needed by the industry. But that data needs to be accessible too. And a lot of that data is private or is locked in a single hospital, you know, because they have their system and the hospital across the street's got their system and they don't talk. So how can you trace the same patient across those things? So yeah, you're right. It's a good observation.
You mentioned earlier new policies being made by the FDA and other organizations. Do you think those policies will come from more subjective, like research done by doctors, or do you think there's ever a possibility in the future where once you get enough big data from multiple companies, that data will influence their policies? Where you see that over the course of 10 years across 10 million patients, this particular factor is very beneficial and
Right.
will influence their decision.
Right, so the question is around, and correct me if I'm wrong, around healthcare policy making by the FDA and the process about how they go about it, you know.
And the big data being collected.
You're right, you know, and jumping ahead on it, you know, it's always with working with the agency, it's an iterative process, always. So they observe a broad cross-section of the industry. So in this case, you're looking not only at just post-marketing surveillance, so you're looking at how patients actually do. Do they get better? They have better success rates, and there's ways, and they require companies to conduct trials to measure that. And then that kind of results will feed back into the next generation of things that come through the system. And they have two main mechanisms, at least as far as working with us on the other side, where there's the regulations that we have to follow. So they've established enough evidence that something has to be a certain way. And then there's the guidances that I talked about, where they say, we're pretty sure about this, but we're not 100% sure. So if you know better than us, because you probably do, because you're in the industry and you're actually doing it, let us know and we'll talk about it. And so we are working, as myself and other people in the industry, thousands of people, working constantly to help guide the agency on the guidances that they use. So that's an evolving process that never stops too. So I see that there's something that they would probably tread kind of lightly for a while with the data piece of this and the technology piece, because the bigger headaches right now are legal headaches between states, and so that's part of a problem that we're going to have to address first to open up a real national-wide marketplace too. So there's economic barriers as well to this kind of space when it comes to the privacy of the information and what's collected, which is why there's a lot of very clinical things and very consumer things right now that are coming out, but not a lot of stuff in the middle yet, right? Thank you.
I wanted to say a few words.
Sure.
Thank you very much again.
Thank you, appreciate it. Can I ask questions, Matthew?
Yeah, you can ask me questions anytime. Couple of quick things I wanted to mention to everyone. First is that what you're seeing here is a preamble or a section of a new course we are going to offer on telehealth beginning from next semester. And that's actually going to be offered by Brian Ennis himself, and we are going to do it in a similar mode as what we've done this whole course. We will have it in multiple modes. One is the classroom mode, which is usually the most preferred one, where you can ask direct questions. The other one is you can view it later on. Whether it will be simultaneously or delayed, we will make the decision. And these are issues on which I really need inputs from you, both the set of people who are here and as well as the set of people who are viewing it later on. We want your comments and reactions, suggestions about how we can improve it. What was your experience with this course? We also want to make it clear that we are addressing two different audiences here. One is the audience who's taking this course for credit. They are going to use it for graduation purposes. And the other is, at least this semester, we have made all these lectures available to anybody and everybody in the world located anywhere without paying any fee. So we are letting people view these lectures. The people who are not doing it for course credit, how do we address questions from them? This semester we have taken it. Are we going to continue this model in the future? Are we not going to continue it in the future? Those are issues where we need some feedback from you. So I would really encourage each and every one of you to go to the Udemy site, which is there. Try to fill in some of the information, give us some feedback on it. And again, any constructive feedback that you can give, we really welcome it so that we can go ahead and use it in the future. Today's lecture was originally, or at least at one point, we were thinking of doing it in a different mode. Part of it being done by Mr. Ennis, part of it being done by me. I was going to cover more of the public policy aspect, the legal aspect, the business aspects of it. But I'm really glad the way it has turned out, because we have been able to delve much more deeper into the computer science issues, the information systems kind of issues. And again, this interactive question answer session really brings out some of the real capabilities and the expertise of the guest speakers that we bring in. So I really wanted to use that to do it. I should also say that from the description that you've heard today, the way I look upon the global telemedicine market is there are different segments to it. As far as innovation in computer science and IS, in terms of communication of information, being able to monitor, I think again from the way it's been described, especially today, the US clearly has a lead in this area. If we do it right, we can really play the role model, develop this new industry both for the US as well as for the whole world. The second market is the market of electronic health records themselves. There I think the smaller nations may have some degree of lead because they've been able to have nationwide systems which are uniform. Irrespective of which doctor you'll see in that country, all your records get merged into a single system. But these are small nations. Whether this model can be replicated on a larger scale, that remains to be seen. In the US, the VA, the Veterans Administration, has had a common system for many years. It's a wonderful system, and some people advocate whether this should become the standard for everyone to use. And this is one of the issues that I have taken up in one of my papers, which has been accepted for publication but has not yet come out. But again, these are pros and cons to it, and again, I think it's a wonderful model to consider, especially if we are going to have telehealth and telemedicine, how these models will develop over future. The third market which is there is of having the doctor in one place, the patient in another place. That, I think, number of other countries have taken the lead in it. The US is relatively behind on that area. And the issues are not really technical, the issues are not even healthcare. Many of the issues are really the legal issues and the public policy issues, which is again a different segment to really look after. And again, it really deserves a full lecture on itself to really do justice to it. And that's one of the issues which we'll cover when we reconvene next semester, taking up this issue on telehealth as a full-length semester course. So again, I really thank you for all your inputs, all your suggestions, and I hope this has been a useful experience for you. And this concludes this particular course and this lecture for this semester. Thank you very much.